So these numbers are like again 18 months old. Now close to 1.5 billion enrollments have happened where they have issued Aadhars, and then the number of Aadhar authentication that we do on a daily basis around I think 30 million authentications per day. It has been designed to scale up to 100 million. And because of the various restrictions that has come up after Supreme Court ruling, that number has come down. But number of KYCs and Aadhars that we do is close to 30 to 40 million per day, and KYCs are almost 10 million per day. KYCs are happening on a daily basis, and till date numbers is what you see here. And because of the Aadhar nature, as the deduplication of the biometrics has to be happening for any new enrollment. So this is the number of searches that we do, quadrillion, 12 quadrillion searches per day as part of the system architecture to do that deduplication. And that is something that goes behind the scenes, and very few people see the importance of that. But that is what the complexity of the system has been, and that's been more stable and then working seamlessly well for us till date. So in a nutshell, the platform has been designed using the best known practices that we all talk today, like Digit and other systems, keeping it loosely coupled and modular and designed for failure. And those are the basic 101s that we been talking lately, is all being baked into, and we have been talking about it in most of the programs and platforms already today. So again, I won't go in details of that, and we'll have a separate conversations on that. But coming to the to Manisha's point of how is it being making impact on the field in terms of authenticability. Finally, the end use case of Aadhar is to get a digital identity, and the digital identity has been translated into a number from a philosophical architecture point of view. And that it is not a card or anything. As long as you have that number, it's an online ID. So one can always verify that identity coming online and understanding that the person who he claims to be is the same person through various forms of authentication. And again, the various forms of authentication, most of you should be knowing already, is Aadhar supports demographic authentication, which is on the lower spectrum, and then comes OTP, and then the biometric authentications where finger, iris, and lately in last couple of months, we've been rolling out in a limited testing pilot mode, face authentication. And those are the three key forms of authentication that it supports. Now, the biometrics from privacy point of view, what has happened is that biometrics are so sensitive in such a nature that people started raising the questions of privacy and aspects around that on two aspects of it. One is, if my biometrics are stolen, they can be replayed as a activity, and then somebody can take over an identity. Second thing that comes with this whole concept is that Aadhar number itself is a deduplicate ID, and that is universal in nature. So if every database has that, then people can start profiling. So those are the two logical constraints and that conversation that have been going on for last few years since the Supreme Court case. And the way Aadhar addresses those concerns is what I will try to focus in today's conversation, and then give the details or techniques and mechanisms that are available for people to efficiently use and integrate that in the applications if required. So one, when it comes to capturing of the biometrics, it is all about how one can securely capture it so that there is no possibility of taking and replaying that biometrics again. So what we have done is that from beginning, there is this interoperability of biometrics across vendors from marketplace perspective. We try to standardize using the virtual device management, VDM APIs, wherein it is almost like open standards, right? Aadhar has created a standard. So if market has like 100 biometric capturing devices, we ensure everybody is complying to our Aadhar API so that the capture process is streamlined across applications as well. Be it for single fingerprint, single finger capture, which is done for authentication, or multi-finger slab that you see in the second row, which is done for enrollment. Across the board, we have ensured that it is streamlined, number one. Number two, that with respect to security side of the story, what has happened is the registered device concept has come into play. What registered device does is that it ensures the the biometrics that are captured or signed on the device and ensure that with a timestamp, so that biometrics cannot be replayed again, technically speaking. So that is the second innovation that has happened in Aadhar. And today, all forms of enrollment and authentication happens through these two techniques. One is standardized APIs, but that's more a market play, and registered device specification, what we call as L0 and L1 specifications. L0 primarily being it is running at a bit of hardware software combination, and L1 is purely hardware, and that is kind of rolling out as we speak in coming weeks and months. And that will even further strengthen the whole ecosystem, is how the Aadhar has been working with the market players to standardize these things. So that's on the biometric capture, what we call registered device specs. Now, if any AUA, okay, before I go into AUA, let me complete this and I'll focus more on the authentication side. So this is how the enrollment module works. Enrollment module is basically, we again ensure the identity system that is being designed as a social infrastructure for larger good. We didn't want to depend on one vendor and then be a scapegoat of that entity being up and running all time. So again here, the architecture principle has been to create diversification and ensure there are three ABIS. ABIS is nothing but your biometric identification services are basically decoupled in such a way such that the system, Aadhar as a system, is not dependent on one vendor, and three vendors work in parallel. And there's a voting mechanism that gets at least two of them has to, the request will go to at least two, any random two, and then ensure that the same disposition is coming from both of them, so that the identity from a deduplication perspective is robust enough for the accuracies that Aadhar has been able to do till date. And it is up to close to 99.39, I believe, or 29s in terms of accuracy of false positives that comes out of that. So, so that's the in terms of how the deduplication works, and the 2 quadrillion searcher that you talked about is where this activity happens in this subsystem, and this subsystem has to be works efficiently only when all known identities are inserted into these 3 subsystems, and then when the dedupe happens, they know they have the complete set. So these are all subtle details in terms of low-level design in terms of getting the logic right, but that's how the system is built seamlessly through a middleware component, and then these systems are running independently, and we can always swap one over the other. And in fact, we have done that multiple times. As at the platform of this scale, you will be surprised to know that we have replaced ABISs in the past once, and then second time, which is happening every few years as part of contracts and other things that goes with it. And in addition to that, the databases that goes and stores the data is also plug and play in such a way so that we can replace from one database to another database with ease. I wouldn't say with the flip of a switch, with some minimal refactoring, we were able to do those things because of the nature of the architectural at the implementation level principle that have been followed there in a sense. So that's on the enrollment side, where the deduplicated ID comes by taking each of those fingers and then trying to match with all the known fingers that are there in the system, and then you get a deduplicated response, and against that the Aadhar number gets generated. So, but from an end user perspective, as a citizen, you and I, there are only 2 APIs that Aadhar provides from a minimalistic platform perspective. One is authentication API, other one is a KYC. Authentication is basically saying whether the person who is claiming to who it is with an yes or no answer without revealing any additional information about that individual to the caller. It is basically like typical OAuth kind of a scenario with yes or no. And KYC is all about like open ID in a sense, where you're getting the profile of that individual. Here you get a digitally signed demographic data out along with the photograph, primarily to meet the whole financial and other regulatory requirements that are there in terms of opening an account and then proving one's identity to do any business transactions. So this was an afterthought, and it was not there in the original when 2009, when the system started off. KYC was not even thought about, but that whole concept came in because all this information was there and identity authentication was also happening. Why can't we give a digital sign response so that we can unleash this whole digital innovation that we have seen in terms of number of bank accounts that got opened with Aadhar, KYC, and so forth, is all now history, and we all know the importance of that. I won't go into details of it, but these are the two key APIs that we kept to the minimal, and that is what the core system does even today, and it will continue to do for next 10, 50 years, I would say easily. But what has happened after that is basically how to improve the efficiency of the ecosystem in terms of interactions and other things, is what, as a product, what we have done. Now that is where this variation starts coming in. Now, India being such diverse a country with different characteristics of in terms of access and reach, what has started as a purely online system, we started taking the technology capabilities that are available with smartphones that are opened up to start introducing offline capabilities as well. And the difference between the two, basically online is the way the online system work in Aadhar. This is where I think now coming to the authentication and KYC domains, Aadhar system at the core is not a B2C service. To keep it simple, it is a B2B from an transaction point of view, but B2C from an Aadhar has a direct relationship with the customer, which is a resident, to do the enrollment and to manage the profile, to do update and so forth. But when it comes to authentication, user cannot through an online system say, okay, like an Gmail OAuth that we do, right? OpenID. Aadhar doesn't enable that service. It provides through a channel called, it is hidden inside as the principle there was that if you take electric grids today, it's a critical infrastructure. As a consumer, we don't go and draw from the electric grid directly the power right at home. We always go to our the service providers like Bescoms and so forth at state level, and usually states have the distribution capability, and few states have opened it up to private entities, Tata Power and so on and so forth. So we go to that layers, and then they in turn connect to the grid to get the power out. So that's the mindset that has been thought through for most of our core infrastructures. If you look, not only Aadhar, all of our digital infrastructures at platform for the country that has been done, be it GST, be it UPI, and etc. They're all layered around a techno-legal entities that we put together, because technical solution alone will not solve some of these critical infrastructure issues. You need some legal wrapper around it. So in that context, the concepts in GST, if you look at it, there are GSPs, GST Suvidha providers. In case of UPI payments, you have banks, and then the payment service providers who are providing the interface to the end citizens. In case of Aadhar, what is there is something called ASA, which is Aadhar service agencies, which can talk to Aadhar data center CIDR directly through secure channels, dedicated secure channels. So that's how the data is secured, and ensuring that only those trusted individuals can access the data as a proxy or relay through. And with enough governance so that they can't see anything that is going through them, they're acting purely like a proxy or a proxy to relay the information from point A to point B. The ASAs are in turn basically have the relationship, what we call AUAs, authentication user agencies, which are usually the business service providers that as end users we connect to banks and telecom providers and government agencies and so on and so forth. They are the actual service providers who are providing end last mile connectivity to the residents. The AUAs are the ones who will have to get licensed through both the entities, UIDI and ASAs in parallel. So it's like a tri-party, tri-legal setup that goes with it. So it is not one player directly having access to the whole system. Now, the citizens who are actually customers to this AUAs, think of them as banks or insurance or telecom providers, citizens work with those applications, which in turn work to ASA and then to UIDI, which is CIDR, is the Central Data Information Repository, is what we call the core database that Aadhar holds. And that's how the authentication or the access is provided. So for any online authentication to happen for a real-time basis, this is the channel through which one has to navigate through to get an authenticated response. And for citizens who are directly trying to download an eAadhar or mAadhar application through which one has to manage their profile, then UIDI directly exposes that to the citizens as a point-to-point, as a UIDI treats them as direct customers and then provide those services. But those services that you get there, or basically you get a signed offline XML, plus your capability to see those profile and update the profile and so on and so forth. Most of you would have seen SSUP portal through which one can go and then manage the profile information in terms of updating their address, mobile, and so on and so forth. So in a nutshell, there is this concept of offline and online. Online is where the techno-legal capabilities come in, and then the real-time nature of providing digital services opens up. And then offline is more in terms of end user having the control, because at the end of the day, the data is citizens' data and he owns that data. Me as Vijay, that is my Aadhar number and my data, I can always get a digitally signed copy and use it to wherever I want to go and then consume services. Unfortunately, what has happened is that people have been trying more towards an online system, but very little on offline. But this is where I think we are working towards as a next innovation in terms of how one can store this offline XML that one could download in an mAadhar app for that matter, and use it to share it with the trusted entities and then get the service on demand, even when there is no network connectivity and so on and so forth. So that is one product innovation that has been going on, but there is no much, what to say, the visibility in terms of ecosystem to consume that data for XYZ reasons, primarily because of the whole Aadhar Supreme Court case of in terms of how to store Aadhar numbers and so on and so forth. So that's where the next slide, if I go into what we have the concept of, if you look at the privacy, I talked about two levels, right? One is at the biometric data as such, and then the second one is at the Aadhar number. So for Aadhar number, if one can triangulate the databases across the system, one can easily try to do joins and then understand what that individual is capable of doing between these systems. So what has happened as part of those discussions on privacy and balancing between the benefits of Aadhar and also to ensure the privacy of citizen is protected, what has happened is that these two new concepts have come up, which very few people are aware of it, which is basically the concept of virtual ID and UID tokens. So I'll just spend a minute here just to get these two concepts out. One, on virtual ID, you can think of it as like one-time usable tokens, or an citizen can control when he wants to go get a new token. One can always go get one token for every transaction if he has to, or do it for every few days as such if required. So these virtual IDs are basically derivative of your one's permanent UID, which are valid if that UID comes to the backend for authentication. Aadhar system will be capable to understand and map it to a permanent UID and then pull up the records for authentication. So what happens in this process is that the channels through which you are navigating through the AUA, ASA, and UIDI, they don't see the UID, they see the VID in the channels, and then that is what they store in their databases as part of the service offering. And eventually, two systems will have two different VIDs, and through which they can't triangulate and do those kind of activities. The other thing that has happened is that this whole concept of how should one handle UID, and that is where the whole use cases of Aadhar Vault, wherein to secure the UID also in a secure location with encryption, was kind of like has been advised, and then there's been some, I would say, extreme positions have been taken, which kind of like demotivated the end use of Aadhar number. UID number was not supposed to be a secret number. It was supposed to be a private number, but not secret. There's a difference between public, private, and secret, right? PIN, passwords, ATM pins are secrets, which you alone know, nobody else will know about it. Private are something that only those confident people in that transaction will be knowing, let's say account number. Nobody knows your account number as such, but the transactions, if you are trying to transact between two parties, then they know that account number, which is private. And public is your mobile number and then name, etc. and so forth. So UID was supposed to be private, but somehow in the conversation happened to be a secret, and that kind of like demotivated the end benefits of use of Aadhar in an open way. So to balance that thing from privacy advocates and then to from a digital innovation and spread, what UID has done is the concept of UID token. UID token is nothing but an alias of an UID, but at an AUA level. So UIDA works only with these three agencies, ASA and AUAs. ASAs are purely proxies. They are not adding any functional value from an end business transaction point of view. And ASAs are usually large infrastructure providers like telecom providers, banks, and so on and so forth, who are usually signed as ASAs. And AUAs are the end service business providers, like banks, retail, government agents, and so forth. So the UID token is nothing but an alias which is unique for a given ASA and a resident. It will always be unique. So if I go to Airtel and use my UID or VID for that matter, he gets a UID token as a response from the backend, which can be stored in their databases and then try to match that, associate to that customer ID in a sense. And then this UID token cannot be triangulated. Now, if two databases come together between Airtel, Jio, or XYZ databases, then one cannot try to do a join and then try to find the records which are overlapping between the two systems and try to gain intelligence about a user. So that's where the whole concept of privacy comes in, right? Because of that unique ID that has opened up with Aadhar. So the UID token concept is primarily helping us to get that privacy balance and move away totally away from UID. Though UID started off with an online ID to being private, at some point as the product matured and then people are more comfortable to keep it secret. These are the two innovations that has opened up in last three to 4 years, I would say, but not much adoption has happened on these things. But that is something that is partly there was not much communication or education has also happened to the ecosystem, and then ease through which the products have been innovated to do this has also not happened. But these are some of the core technical concepts through which one can bring the end-to-end balance between digital innovation and also making sure the residents' privacies can be protected and balanced. So these are the two core concepts through which any new innovation or integration that anybody, actually, especially in product owners and techno-functional team want to use Aadhar, these are the things that one would like to balance and start using these things. In addition to that, there are these other capabilities that have been there, but not many people know about it, is concept of biometric locking. One can go log their biometrics in Aadhar, so that accidentally, if somebody even knows the Aadhar number or gets the biometrics and wants to replay, one can rest assured that they can't do it unless there is two-factor authentication to go and unlock the biometrics again. So those are the kind of innovations that are there, or product features that exist to balance the security aspect of the data that goes into the central repository. And Aadhar locking is also another feature that happened, wherein at Aadhar number level, one can temporarily lock and nobody can use UID to do authentication, and they can only do VIDs. And to generate VIDs, one has to have a registered phone and then app through which one can generate temporary tokens and then use them for authentication, just like in credit card, and then email service providers lately have been offering some of these services as well. And the third thing is the concept of liveness, biometric liveness. So the replay attacks are usually done through capturing the fingerprints from doorknobs and so on and so forth. One can take face images from cameras and then try to replay. So this is where some of the R&D work has been going, and we have successfully demonstrated that through machine learning models, one can detect a fake biometric versus a live person trying to authenticate the system, and then try to protect the security of the system or the end user in terms of malicious users misusing or taking over that user's identity. And of course, a multi-factor authentication, wherein combination of these authentications of OTP and biometrics within biometric finger plus face and so on can be added to increase the security of the transaction, especially if it is a very high value transaction of insurance premiums or insurance claim of more than certain amount, let's say. And those are the things that one can apply and balance the So this is pictorially representing how this transaction goes through these layers. One would be surprised to see that even though the number of hops are like there are 5-6 hops in the process, typical finger authentication takes less than 2 seconds or 3 seconds to complete end to end. So the having the layers is not adding any complexity as such. It is kind of improving security, and the platform has been designed such that it is well secured, at the same time not compromising the user's efficiency in a sense. And UID has little awareness of purpose or location of that authentication. And this is the idealistic authentication model that UID would like to, from a design perspective at least, that exists, wherein one can balance both privacy while ensuring highest security and also reach. All the three verticals of reach, ease of use, or and security and privacy are all balanced, and at the same time try to scale the system for millions of authentications per hour can be achieved. And the combinations of the ingredients that go in that are basically the concept of registered devices, which is ensuring the security of capture at source, concept of virtual ID, which is anonymizing the UID factors, and then the concept of UID token, which is stored on the return web on the response on the business databases to ensure that again the anonymization exists there, and then there is a lifetime guarantee that that UID token is constant, and at the same time the authentication, the KYC responses are digitally signed and encrypted from a security point of view. So in a nutshell, this is where the whole architecture from an functional placement point of view, the ingredients that exist as we speak today, in addition to those other features of locking and liveness that exist, what the offerings of Aadhar been today. So I'll just pause there and take questions. But in terms of other services with respect to face and face authentication and so forth, those are the services that are just being opened up, and then once they fully released in the market from the current pilot mode, it is going to open up a plethora of opportunities in terms of people trying to use the face authentication along with this offline KYC XML that exists. Offline KYC XML has a photo in the XML, which is a digitally signed response to prove that who the person who is claiming. It is like they're carrying that token with them, and face is always with them. So the apps can be built, innovative apps can be built wherein one can scan the digitally signed response XML and then capture the photo in real time and do a local match without UID or any other system knowing, and then allowing you to avail a service. And that is the holy grail spot, I would say, that is going to open up in coming months and years, which is going to change the face in which we interact with our service providers and then the way we consume services. One good example today, my favorite example has been this whole concept of when we walk into airport, we have the CRPF personnel taking your boarding pass and he's taking your ID and then he's looking at your face and trying to say who you claim to be, and you are authorized to use this service to enter an airport. Let's take that example for that matter. Nothing stops today with these ingredients that are there. One can write an application at a gate entry level, wherein one can create at the time of boarding pass generation, one can with the user authenticated consent, can generate this QR code on the boarding pass. It could be your check-in app itself, and which has a digitally signed XML with the photograph and the travel details attached all in a single QR code. All one has to do is show the QR code at the gate entry application that is running there, and it will read the data and then capture the photo in real time, check that live person is who is. And if it's all good, show the green mark to move on. So there is hardly any touch point, and then it opens up the that service for the person to go in. And this same thing can be used for other extreme cases in a PDS, where majority of them are getting denied for the service because of the fingerprints, wherein the fingerprints are getting worn out, especially in villages, farmers, where they have their work handy using their hands. The uniqueness of this authentication factor is that biometric authentication decreases in accuracy over life, especially when the person is a handsmith with using its hands way more in terms of wear and tear that happens on the minutiae, versus the face, where the face is going to be stable as they age. In the early years of the age, the face will change from their teenage years to the childhood to teenage years. So the accuracies are inversely proportional. In a nutshell, the accuracies of face authentication until 22, 25 years, if it is around 88 to 92%, the accuracy of face authentication as they go beyond 25 to 45 and so on, goes up to 98, 99% and so on. Whereas for fingerprint accuracies are much higher at the earlier ages, up to 30, 40. And after that, they started waning out and then they start decreasing. So having the combination of these authentication factors as an option is going to help the digital economy, and then the service opportunities that one can leverage is what we are hoping that it will change in coming months and years to come. So I'll just pause here. I know I've done a lot of information overload here, but I will pause to take questions and see if there are anything specific, then I can cover them appropriately.
Amya, team, any other questions? Yes, Brinda.
Hi, Vijay.
Hi, Brinda.
Hey. So, sorry, I was actually just wrapping my mind around the VID, and I mean, just because we were reading into a little understanding of the system within, like how the ecosystem has accepted Aadhar, right? I mean, if you could just like touch upon, as per your experience, how states have actually adopted Aadhar, and what are the kind of hurdles that states faced, and at the same time, what are the kind of advantages they took parallelly with the Aadhar tech system? If you could just explain, like through your experience, if there was something in the past.
I think Aadhar is one such system where there has been least resistance from states, if I were to put it that way. Interestingly, I've been hearing this argument from another trusted source, where unlike GST, it's a federated system. There was a fight happened in terms of adoption of GST, if you take the parallels of it. With Aadhar, I don't think there was any resistance from any state for that matter. If you go back in time, because everybody understood and appreciated the need for Aadhar, and I don't think there is one single state that really opposed it, right? In my view, at
Correct.
least.
Yes.
From functional perspective. Coming to technical challenges as such in terms of usage, I think one can look in terms of adoption. I would say the following: the biometric authentication, as I said, in terms of biometric finger authentication as the population target segment that you target to give a service using biometric authentication, right? So in that context, one has to create digital exception processes, what we always recommend, so that there is no denial of service happening, right? In the early days, you could have seen some news articles saying that this person didn't get his ration because he didn't authenticate himself and all that. And then there was enough guidelines that went out saying that a digital system is a tool to solve a problem, but it can't be the only ways and means to do it. And there were guidelines associated to it. So there's this act, there's a law, and then regulations, and then guidelines that goes in any system. And then enough guidelines have been issued to ensure from an denial of service perspective, nobody is at harm, number one. And at the same time, the awareness in terms of how to use technology in a right way, in terms of building the right application, so that especially in any, it's not specific to Aadhar, let me put it that way. Any digital system when you build, and then if it is not product as a system is not architected well in terms of their technical maturity, the citizen is going to suffer, right, at the end of the day. And Aadhar being a backend platform, the responsibility lies from both sides. The end system interface that is building from business service offering perspective has to be robust enough as well. So that is where I think the concept of certifications and then constant reviewing of those AUA licenses in terms of their authentication success factors, and then giving those feedback to the AUA saying that, hey, this is your success rate that is happening. So why don't you reflect upon yourself to see how you can improve those success factors? So and UIDAI is openly sharing those percentages available on website, I believe, in terms of authentications and then success parameters openly. And then at the AUA level, at business transaction level, some of those are being shared to them so that those are constantly improved. And then it has happened as well. Year on year now, if you take some of these reports that are independently being published, there is enough content available right now that system has matured as we speak. But as any digital system adoption that goes with it, there were hurdles in the past, and then the guidelines helped solve some of it, and some part of the techno-legal constraints put in through guidelines. And second thing is with respect to technology maturity, by handholding the state systems to design systems right, is how I think that got addressed.
Thanks. Just a follow-up question, right? So I was thinking from the idea of consent, correct? And from a legal perspective, right? The Aadhar Act and the regulations speak a lot about getting the consent of a citizen, right? Thinking from the legal perspective, yeah, it theoretically seems very doable, right? Like for the legal people. But when it comes to the tech part, right? As per you, like how has the consent mechanism been inbuilt in the system? And as well, if you have come across any kind of states through their particular licenses or contracts, how are they managing the consent of citizens with the Aadhar numbers? Yep.
Okay, consent is something that needs to be matured, as we see not only in India, across the globe for that matter. And nobody has cracked that till now to be fair enough from a technical point of view. And then technical solutions are coming up recently as we speak. But consent has always been techno-legal, let me put it that way. It's always been techno-legal. And then when I say techno-legal, that the systems are audited in terms of the consent is captured, and then the process of consent, be it at the paper form or digitally, and then through now some video images and so forth, people are basically doing that. So to answer your question, majority of it is happening in techno-legal world, and then people are managing consent to ensure that is how it is done. From Aadhar perspective, if you look, I already touched upon there are enough I wouldn't call techno-legal, technical solutions that are there wherein one cannot replay an authentication. So today, if I go get an authentication done for a purpose X through consent X, technically Aadhar backend is capable of detecting that authentication if that comes again for the same purpose or a different purpose as well.
My name is Pranav. I want to ask one thing. You elaborated on the authentication part. What about authorization? Could you elaborate that too? And also, it sometimes so happens that I authorize something, then I don't lock it. Then maybe the authorization may be open and maybe misused as well. Is it possible or not?
Valid question. That's the reason it is called Aadhar authentication. It's not an authorization framework.
No, I am talking about authorization. Because
Aadhar as a platform.
I am authenticating myself. Okay, but maybe I am authorizing Brinda to access the information which I am authenticating. So there comes means the difference between these two. For example, Brinda may have some use with the data which I am authenticating. That I am being authenticated as Pranav, and then Brinda is authorized to access the data which is authenticated by Pranav. So there comes the question that how would you did you manage this part?
No, answer is simple. UIDI is not taking any authorization responsibility at this stage. It is authenticating. It is an authentication system. Usually the two systems that work hand in hand, authentication and authorization system, like you rightly said, and technically as well, okay? And the authorization aspect of it today, as you look Aadhar, is the services or applications that are built using Aadhar authentication to expose those services. And those services are taking that responsibility in terms of ensuring the authorization leg to avail a particular service once this authentication is proven. Point number one. Point number two, there is this new framework. This goes beyond Aadhar for that matter. I have to wear my iSpirit hat in a sense for a minute. Is the concept of data empowerment protection architecture, DEPA, in terms of consent architecture that is coming up separately to solve these problems independent, because these are all foundational blocks. On a foundation block, if you add the layers, it will get constrained, and then it won't be scaling enough from a domain agnostic way, in a sense. Because for me, authorization rules from a banking perspective, from insurance perspective, and XYZ domain perspective, there may be subtleties that will happen and change, healthcare and so on and so forth. Especially if you take healthcare into mix. Authorization in healthcare, it has got many complexities as well, because when I'm in a critical life state situation, my authorization, I won't be available to give authorization in that sense. And then the de facto, in terms of my delegatee or my healthcare professional, has the right to do what is required, right? So from that perspective, the whole consent architecture and the framework that is coming separately as a module or a platform is kind of like handling the authorization aspect of it. I'll be more than happy to talk about that separately, where what we call is that data empowerment architecture, protection architecture, wherein the consents are given, and then the consent artifact has the authentication and the authorization embedded as one unit, and then that artifact goes on behalf of Pranav to an XYZ bank or a data provider through your authorized person to access the data there. So think of it like this. You have a bank where your bank statements are residing, and you went to a loan provider to seek loan. You are authorizing that person to go get your bank records for last 3 months so that he understands your financial history to provide you a personal loan. Let's assume that use case. So you're authorizing this consumer, what we call data information user or data consumer.
Yeah,
As
here
end user,
my
you're
question
authorizing
is
him to
slightly
start.
different. My question was here, if I authorize somebody, now will he be, from what I see, that entity can access my data unless I bar again. Okay, is it not possible to build in more granularity?
No, that is what I'm saying, that authorization has to come closer to data.
Yeah, but Pranav, the issue, the other point, first thing, that is not scope of Aadhar. Aadhar scope is only authentication, firstly. So,
But
the question that you're asking is outside the scope of
no,
Aadhar.
one thing is, Aadhar is authenticating for what? Okay, it is authenticating. When I am authenticating, I am at the same time authorizing also.
No. Authentication, it is authenticating that you are you. That's all it is. It is an identity provider. It's not an authorization. So please understand the difference.
So suppose I give certain information to say my mobile provider. Okay, then mobile provider will not be able to access my data, verify my name, my location, and my address, and so many other PII. This is the question.
Yeah. So what's the?
So that is a kind of, I'm authorizing that mobile provider to access my.
No, that's what I'm saying. So that is the reason that concept of AUA exists, where that techno-legal binding has been put. That's the reason I explained the layers. As a user, you're not talking to UIDAI directly, right? As a user, there are two channels through which one can get your data. One is through AUA ASA channel. Other one is you have a direct relationship with UIDAI through Aadhar app or using UIDAI portal. You download your information, right? Right? Now, once you download that digital artifact and you give it to a provider, then you are in person authorizing that person because you are in control of the data. That is clear, right? From that channel. And the other AUA ASA channel, that is the reason the techno-legal thing has come in with the consent and purpose that AUA is supposed to have a business relationship with that provider. I mean, the data citizen, customer who is authenticating, right? So he's basically entered a business relationship with that AUA. And because of that business relationship, you are authenticating / authorizing to that AUA, and where the techno-legal binding comes in. And then he is using that authorization to initiate an authentication in the process, right? That is the whole point of consent in the first place. So you don't go give an authentication, put your fingerprint for authentication, unless you know you're opening a telecom account, mobile account for that matter, right?
But in some cases, it could be just a one-time affair. After that, they should not be able to access my data.
That has been put, and that technically it is solving because that biometric that you provide to authenticate, or that OTP that you provide to authenticate, is a one-time use. And technically, Aadhar has ensured that it cannot be reused again.
Okay, so it is again some other time it may be required for repeated, for example, in case of income tax, maybe, I don't know. But Aadhar is asking me to lock my data again. Why it is so? So that means that unless I lock, it can be reused, that authorization.
No. I think you are taking it in a different context altogether. Lock has been done from a different perspective altogether, saying that
it should be auto locked, isn't it?
Auto lock, one can enable that and it will auto lock. Today, that is how it has been designed. So if you go unlock it, after one time use, it goes or locks itself out. It opens up for that period. Suppose you are, let's say you are doing a registration. You went to a sub-registrar office to do registration, and there you are Aadhar auth is mandatory, right? So you are doing registration at 3:15 in the afternoon. So you would go lock yourself, unlock yourself around 3:05 or 3:10, and then you, by the time you go put your finger, you will, it will go through. And then next time when you try to do the same authentication, it will be locked by that self. Again, you have to unlock it. You understood? So you are in control when you want to open the vault and then give access to, basically it has given two capabilities, one to the end user, you as an Aadhar holder whose data is, Aadhar is the custodian of your data at the end of the day. And it has given the control to the end user as a citizen to control when to lock and when to unlock. Okay, so that is at one level. The AUA transaction that you have done to open a bank account or mobile account and so forth, again is a consented based architecture through which that transaction goes through, and then it cannot be repeated again. It is not like your standing instructions every month I want to debit something for payment. Aadhar doesn't, Aadhar doesn't allow that, because wherein that one can generate that consented architecture because you need to provide your fingerprint or OTP every time.
If Vijay, I am moving. I need to jump into another meeting, so we've already crossed 5. So
yes, I have.
Questions, team, please free. Otherwise, I don't know if you have few more minutes. Otherwise, we can close the session.
Yeah, I have just one question. This is Sudhir here. You have time, or do you want to wrap up?
I can quickly spend another 5 minutes and then wrap it up.
Yeah, just one question on the technology side. You mentioned that it takes a couple of seconds for a response to come from the Aadhar ecosystem. I just want to figure out, as far as I see, there are two distinct transactions. One is authentication, where you've been given the Aadhar ID, Aadhar number, you've also been given the biometric details, and you just have to compare and then go back with yes or no. The other is dedupe. Do you take 2 seconds even for dedupe? Because I'm just trying to figure out.
Dedupe is purely a one-time activity when you're doing a new enrollment or doing an update of your biometrics, and that is not a real-time transaction. There it is within a day, the SLA is within a day and stuff like that.
Got it. Because that's not few seconds, right? Because dedupe is really huge. I just wanted to figure out how much time does it take, just for me to get an idea, Vijay?
No, I
because
think
it stands for the whole database itself.
No, I think we are doing it in another couple of hours now, basically.
Okay. You do a batch
for that matter, but because of the backlog and other things that are there, usually we try to turn around some of the updates can happen within a day, under 24. But our goal is that nothing technically stops us right now to do it in near real time, in minutes, basically. The challenge is the peripheral application that got built over last many years needs some re-engineering to make it happen finally, business processes and stuff like that.
Got it, Vijay. One last question is, do you do a batch process of dedupe, or you do it for every request?
Every request is a streaming. It's streaming. I won't call it batch, it is streaming.
Okay.
It's not a request response either. It is streaming. So in that process is asynchronous service. Yeah.
Got it. Sure, Vijay. Thanks a lot. Thanks for your time.
Great. Thanks, Vijay.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
We do have like a couple of others, but yeah, we'll just bring them to you.
Yeah, sure. Let me know if there's a consultant question I can answer it. Thanks, everyone. It was nice.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Vijay.